All right. I mean, I don't even think I need to introduce you, but obviously everybody knows Kal Penn. What I wanted to start with, which I think everybody wants to know, is how did you start? You went from Harold and Kumar to the White House to Getting Warmer. Like, how did that happen? Walk us through.
That's a nice segue for me to sell my book to all of you.
I forgot author in there.
But
sorry.
yeah, thank you. No, look, I grew up not too far from here in New Jersey. I went to a public high school. I always had varied interests, and I was, I think, very fortunate to have the support or encouragement of a lot of folks around me who kind of embraced the idea that the world is not made up of mutually exclusive choices. So my first love, I think, will always be comedy and making people laugh. But one of the great unifiers of comedy is the opportunity to kind of exchange ideas. And I'm by nature sort of an optimist. So when a show like Getting Warmer came across and they said, you know, we want to do a docuseries that's not doom and gloom, but that's based more on climate solutions, it just seemed like the right fit.
The right place to go.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love it. So when you worked at the White House, you did work a lot with youth activists. You've been around activism quite a bit.
Yeah.
I know you don't classify yourself as a full-on activist since it's not your full-time job, but what have you seen since you have kind of been around it a lot? What works to be a successful activist, and specifically maybe in the climate space?
You're right. Look, I'm not an activist. I certainly consider myself an advocate, but one of the reasons that I don't think I'm an activist is I don't want to disrespect actual activists who are doing the real work day in and day out, or who are doing it professionally. You know, I'm certainly not an expert on any of this, but I think one of the eye-opening things for me that in answering that question, and this was, you know, this was now 10 years ago when I worked in the Obama White House, primarily as the president's point person on outreach to young people, was the degree to which there really isn't a playbook on the best way to engage. And I think for especially a lot of young people in the climate movement, I would include myself in this when I was in high school or college, there wasn't really a sense of, is now the best time to protest? Is now the best time to write a letter, to put on a suit and meet with somebody, to focus on a corporation, to focus on our own individual behaviors? And that's obviously always malleable and it's always changing. But one of the things I learned when I was working in government, I just remember my boss was big on the Hatch Act. So there were all these ethics laws that you couldn't violate. I know the people after that kind of threw those out the window. But in my case, we weren't allowed to say, I would have these incredibly energetic young people who would say, we want the president to do this on climate. And the information would be presented in a way that was almost like, we know he doesn't want to do that. I'm like, no, he really does, but he needs votes in the Senate. And I remember not being able to say that last part, right? And not being able to say, here are the 7 senators you should target if you really want comprehensive climate legislation to get done. I wasn't allowed to say that. And because young people by nature, it's one of the only demographics you age out of, right? You're a senior citizen forever once you reach that point. Any other sort of ethnic group, you're probably identifying that way through most of your life. So there isn't the institutional memory that exists in other organizations. And since young people lead the climate movement in such bold, wonderful ways, that also means that they don't often get to enjoy the fruits of all the activism or all the work that they put in. I think the Inflation Reduction Act is a great example of that. It's probably been decades of really hard lobbying by young people who are no longer 19 years old when Biden signed something like that. And so it's really tough to remind folks, like, what you did 10 years ago is the reason that we now have the political space for somebody to act on something like that. Very long-winded way of saying I think it's really complicated, but that's one of the things that excites me in terms of what the opportunity is in that space. Yeah,
absolutely. So, moving to Getting Warmer, I am just curious, how many people in the room have watched Getting Warmer, an episode of Getting Warmer? All right, that's good. We got like 50% in this room. I am obsessed with it personally as a climate nerd. I think it's the climate school that we all need to go to, just to know the facts about these issues that a lot of people don't know about. What do you find? I think somebody like you hosting the show has brought a lot of awareness to this issue. What do you feel like the role is of that, of bringing awareness and trying to get people to engage in it?
Yeah, I mean, my role was kind of interesting in that I also felt like I went to that school, right? The show itself is about solutions, and it's about people who are doing the right things, and it's kind of a cross-section between advocates or activists, certainly business and the role that government or regulations can play. And because we haven't necessarily had a show with that sort of a focus that doesn't also have the doom and gloom component, it creates an opportunity for that kind of a dialogue. And I think many of you who have seen it, I assume, probably first saw a clip of it that was trending online, or a little clip that was like, oh, I didn't know this about crypto, or this about recycling, or things that, like, I read the paper and I didn't know about this. I know we were talking backstage, but it's like, some of that information that's in there I would have thought would have been a much bigger story than it is. So it's been very exciting to be able to focus on that stuff for a couple of reasons. One, if you care about climate or climate issues, then you just organically, I think, would gravitate towards it. But then number two, if you're one of those people who's like, what can I actually do besides putting the glass bottle in the right garbage can? Like, well, there's a whole slew of things, from the places you can invest your money to the companies that you maybe don't want to work with, to people who maybe thought they were doing the right thing and then all of a sudden, things are going in a different direction. So but going to that school in real life was really eye-opening.
It was amazing. Okay, so one of the things that you did on the show was an expedition to Brooklyn, right around the corner.
Yep.
Let's take a quick look and see what oysters, necklaces, and you and waiters have to do with protecting coastal cities.
Okay.
Oh, look, you can see the big blue crab. Look, there it is.
Right here?
Yes, look right just below where I am.
Look, whoa.
I'm out here on the Brooklyn waterfront sporting the latest in bright orange life jacket fashion to see something that could help protect New York from the next big hurricane. Tanasia here is part of the Billion Oyster Project, an organization that wants to grow just ungodly amounts of shellfish and use them to make New York Harbor less frighteningly polluted.
So oysters are filter feeders. So these oysters here are actually helping to filter the water that's here.
That's why that tastes so good. They're also lending their oysters to a project called Living Breakwaters, which is taking an unorthodox approach to protecting coastlines from the next superstorm. It's just one of many ideas people are coming up with to protect coastal cities from the effects of climate change, as rising seas and stronger storms threaten to make Hurricane Sandy level flooding much more frequent.
One of the things that happened in the wake of Sandy is we wanted to figure out how we could keep the water out, right? But this is New York. Water is part of who we are.
The Living Breakwaters Project, it is a string or necklace of breakwaters. These structures of rock in the water, about half a mile long, off the south shore of Staten Island, that will reduce risk to the shoreline from erosion and storm waves and help restore ecosystems.
All right, so I personally have never been in the water anywhere near New York City. Like, what was that experience like for you?
It was different than I thought it was going to be, for sure. I mean, I joked about this in the episode, but obviously these are not oysters you should eat. But the water has so much life. There's the ecosystem that I think we saw and that she was describing is not something that I think many of us who were either born and raised around New York City or live here now think is possible. So number one, that was very eye-opening. But number two was just this creative solution on how to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. It certainly doesn't solve the cause of it, but it was exciting to know that there were people who were also working on ways to mitigate that.
Yeah. What do you think is the main challenge? And I think we talked about this a little bit, but really that main challenge to get people to actually take that action and make those changes that you were talking about a little bit before?
I don't know. I mean, for me, certainly a lot of it was not necessarily recognizing how impactful my personal behavior could be. And it's one of the trends you'll see if you, throughout a couple of the episodes, is what's the role of the consumer, and to what extent is the onus on the consumer to tell companies that they don't want certain things, or to make certain choices, or to pay a little bit more for something. And the obvious through line there is it's folks who have an income above a certain amount who have the luxury of making those choices largely, right? We're not the ones who have to make a choice on either cost or convenience. A lot of these things are a luxury for us. And so I think it's the responsibility lies on the proverbial, and just to be clear, it's not like the 1% of the 1% who are making billions of dollars. I'm talking about pretty much anybody who can afford to live in New York City. I guess that's 50% of us then, if you read the Times this morning. But but it's that, right? It's like those of us who have the means should do these things so that the price of that will drop and it'll be more accessible, it'll be better for the climate. So that's one thing that I think a lot of times is missed. It's not by accident, and obviously companies don't want you to feel like you should pressure them, but you should pressure them. And that's one of the many ways that I think we can hopefully change some things.
Yeah, I get the sense a lot of times that people have this idea that, oh, it's just too big. I can't. Like, what am I going to do? Like you said. And so it's really hard to get people to overcome that sometimes. So you covered a lot of different issues on Getting Warmer. As we talked about, recyclables was the one that surprised me, which is, just so you know, most of the things you put in that recycling bin do not actually get recycled, which was terrifying to find out.
Yeah.
But you covered that. You covered methane. You covered crypto. What, in your journeys and all of your travels and the show that you did, what was, you think, the most surprising thing that you learned during this process?
All right, you mentioned recycling. Can I give you two answers? I'll give you the like what's the shittiest one, and then what's the one overall?
Yeah, what's the good, what's the bad?
So I'll be more eloquent. The more disappointing one was what you said was about recycling. So it was, I can't remember the exact stat, something like 7 or 8%.
Yeah, I think it's like 8% of things you put in the recycling bin are actually recycled. Yeah.
But one of the reasons for that was very eye-opening was, okay, you see the toothpaste tube and it says it's 100% recyclable. Nobody's going to read the fine print, which says, oh, it's actually this company that makes the toothpaste tube that paid another company a certain amount of money so that 10,000 of these could actually get recycled if you mail them in to an external facility. And because of that, they get to say that it's recyclable. Like, okay, technically recyclable, 10,000 of them, but it's not municipally recyclable. And one of the reasons for that is that the cost to municipalities of recycling is so high that unless they're able to do it en masse, or unless they're being paid to do it, the product they get out of that they can resell isn't sufficient enough, which kind of goes back to what we were saying, that it's sort of the onus is on corporations and consumers to change their behavior. So that was one of the ones that I was like, this is a real bummer. But for as much of the bummers as there's also immense opportunity. I'm really proud of that episode because my hope is that it'll lead to folks recognizing, oh, we're the ones who are going to be able to do more. The other piece of it, though, that I thought was tremendous was we have an episode on batteries, and I got to sit down with the CEO of Panasonic Green, or Panasonic North America, Panasonic Green North America.
Yeah.
And off camera, he was like, I said, thanks, man, thanks for doing this. And he goes, yeah, we realized Panasonic is responsible for 2% of global CO2 emissions, so we thought, we have to. And I just was like, 2%? How embarrassing is that for you? And he goes, no, I know, that's why we're doing this show. I'm like, can I ask you that on camera? And he's like, yes, it's not a secret. Like, we were so embarrassed by this that we decided to let people know that this is a real problem. So he then took me through the ways in which they're trying to invest in closed loop battery manufacturing, the numbers on when they break even in terms of carbon emissions and all of the energy that goes into even that sort of a manufacturing. That was amazing. To me, that was life-changing. That could be planet-changing. Yeah. The idea that we would rather put 2 front-page New York Times stories on Tucker Carlson getting fired instead of on something like this really illustrates the problem. Like, the stakes are way higher if we cover a really big story.
Yeah, clap for that one.
So to me, that's a really good thing, right? I'm so proud of the show. I wish we would do more of that for any of you who are content creators. Like, steal these ideas and do whole features on them. Like, there's so much out there and so many people doing so much good.
Yeah, you're right. I do think, and this show, I feel like, is taking a huge leap towards getting people to really start to comprehend what we need to do. So thank you so much for doing it. Truly, I am just so grateful personally that we have this show and that it exists. If you have not watched Getting Warmer, please go. It's our great new Bloomberg Originals show. And please make sure to check it out. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, sir.